This morning began in a way that might sound ordinary to anyone else, but to me, it carried a quiet sense of ritual, a soft rhythm that anchors the day before the demands of work sweep me away. I woke up just as the faintest light of dawn seeped through the curtains of my small bedroom. The alarm had gone off a few minutes earlier, its shrill sound cutting through the silence, but I didn't rise immediately. Instead, I lingered for a while, half lost in dreams, half present in the early morning stillness, listening to the muffled city noises outside. Somewhere in the distance, a motorbike passed, a dog barked, and a vendor's faint call echoed in the air. These sounds, so common and repetitive, were part of the texture of morning itself, like the first brushstrokes on the canvas of a new day. Eventually, I swung my legs over the side of the bed, stretching slowly. My thoughts, still foggy with sleep, began circling around the day ahead, emails to respond to, tasks to finish, perhaps even a meeting that might stretch longer than expected. But before I could let those responsibilities take root in my mind, I reminded myself of the one small pleasure that has always served as my daily anchor, preparing and eating a simple breakfast. For many people, breakfast might be elaborate: eggs, toast, coffee, fruit. But for me, the comfort lay in something far more modest: a box of instant noodles. Some might scoff at the idea of calling instant noodles a proper breakfast, but for me it holds a special meaning. There is something about the steam rising from the pot, the quick transformation of dry noodles into something soft and flavorful, the way the broth carries warmth into my body. It is not only about filling the stomach, it is about comfort, familiarity, and the sense of starting the day with something both simple and satisfying. I padded softly to the kitchen, my bare feet against the cool tiles. The kitchen itself was quiet, the utensils neatly arranged after last night's washing. The kettle sat on the counter, ready to boil water. The box of instant noodles, resting in the cupboard, almost seemed to wait for me, as if it knew it would be chosen again today. I pulled it out, feeling the light weight of the package in my hand. On the outside, the bright packaging displayed a photograph of what the noodles were supposed to look like once cooked: golden strands immersed in a steaming broth, garnished with vegetables and slices of meat that were more advertisement than reality. Yeah, I smiled at the exaggeration, because I knew very well that my noodles would not look like that. But I also knew they would taste like home. I set a small pot of water on the stove and turned on the gas. The faint click of ignition and the sudden bloom of blue flame marked the start of my cooking ritual. As the water began to heat, I tore open the box and pulled out the contents: the tightly curled brick of dried noodles, the silver foil packet of soup base, and the smaller sachets of dried vegetables and seasoning oil. Each element, though humble, carried the promise of transformation. While waiting for the water to boil, I leaned against the counter and let my thoughts wander. There is something deeply meditative about waiting for noodles. Unlike more complex dishes that demand constant attention, instant noodles give you a small window of stillness. In those 3 or 4 minutes, as the water trembles and begins to roll into a boil, you can drift. I thought about how many times in my life I had stood in this very spot doing this very thing. During my university years, instant noodles were not only a breakfast, but often a late-night dinner, a companion to long study sessions. When I first began working, they were the quick fix after exhausting days when cooking felt like a burden. And now, even when I could choose other things, I still returned to them, not out of necessity, but out of comfort. The water began bubbling, snapping me back to the present. I unwrapped the block of noodles and slid it gently into the pot. The dry strands hissed faintly as they met the hot water, and within seconds they began to loosen and soften, twisting and swirling as if waking from a long slumber. I stirred them lightly with chopsticks, watching as the clear water gradually grew cloudy from the starch. The familiar smell of wheat rose with the steam, already inviting. Next, I tore open the foil packet and emptied the soup base into the water. The fine powder dissolved almost instantly, releasing a savory aroma that filled the small kitchen. It was salty, garlicky, with a hint of spice, nothing gourmet, but unmistakably comforting. I added the small sachet of dried vegetables, tiny fragments of carrot, spring onion, and cabbage that expanded and brightened as they touched the broth. Finally, I squeezed in the seasoning oil, which floated briefly in golden droplets before dispersing, deepening the fragrance. The pot was alive now, noodles swirling, vegetables rehydrating, steam rising thickly. I lowered the flame and let it simmer for another minute, allowing all the flavors to mingle. As I watched, I felt that small but profound sense of satisfaction that comes from creating something warm and nourishing with one's own hands, even if it was just instant noodles. When the noodles reached that perfect point, not too firm, not too soggy, I turned off the heat. I lifted the pot carefully, pouring its contents into a waiting bowl. The sight before me was as comforting as it was familiar. Strands of noodles resting in golden broth, flecked with vegetables, a swirl of steam rising like morning incense. It was not glamorous, but it was mine, carrying the bowl to the small table by the window. I sat down. The sunlight had grown stronger now, filtering through the glass in gentle beams. Outside, the city was stirring, cars honking faintly, footsteps of neighbors heading to work, but inside, there was only me and my bowl of noodles. I picked up the chopsticks, leaned forward, and took the first bite. The warmth spread immediately, not just across my tongue, but through my entire body. The noodles were soft yet springy, the broth salty and savory, the vegetables adding little bursts of texture. It was the kind of flavor that you cannot really explain to someone who has never tried it, because it is not about sophistication or culinary artistry. It is about memory, about association, about how the simplest foods often carry the deepest comfort. As I ate, I reflected on how such a humble breakfast could hold so much meaning. In a world that often pushes us toward complexity, toward bigger and better and more refined, there is something grounding about starting the day with simplicity. A box of noodles, some hot water, a few minutes of waiting. That was all it took to create a small oasis of contentment. Halfway through the bowl, I paused, letting the steam rise against my face. Then I thought about the workday ahead, the tasks lined up, the inevitable stresses, but I also thought about how this breakfast gave me a kind of armor. It wasn't physical strength, it was more subtle, a quiet reassurance that I had taken care of myself, that I had carved out a moment of calm before the rush. I remembered reading somewhere that breakfast is not only about fueling the body, but about setting the tone for the day. And as I sat there, finishing my noodles, I realized how true that was. The act of cooking and eating them was not just about hunger, it was about rhythm, grounding, mindfulness. Each step, from boiling the water to tearing open the packets to lifting the chopsticks, was part of a larger ritual that told me, today has begun, and you are ready. When I finally set down the empty bowl, I felt a quiet satisfaction. It was such a small act, but it carried weight. I rinsed the bowl and chopsticks, leaving them to dry by the sink. The kitchen smelled faintly of broth, a scent that would linger for a while, reminding me of this beginning. As I stepped into the rest of the day, the world outside felt a little less daunting, all because of a box of instant noodles, a pot of boiling water, and the quiet joy of breakfast.